Hey everyone of YouTube, this is Quentin. This is my channel where I am trying my best to stay on top of myself to read books. So this is kind of a challenge to myself to read more on a schedule. But at the same time, it's a fine line of not becoming book bloated, where I just read books because it's a book. And I don't want this to be like college where you read stuff and you hate it and you put it away and you force yourself to read more stuff. You hate it, you put it away. I actually want to read stuff that catches my fancy, and I don't want to stick to a certain genre of things. Although I am a Stephen King fan, and my first book review is Stephen King. So I might have to challenge myself to read something other than Stephen King and a couple other authors that I fall back on. What else? So my first book review is Stephen King, The Institute. This is the UK cover for those who don't recognize it. I really like this cover, and so I pre-ordered it from Amazon UK. Took forever to get here, but it's here now. So I liked a lot of stuff about this book. It reminded me of a book called Speak, and I wrote down the author, Speak by Laurie, Halse, Anderson. And I took an online class in college, and it was just a requirement to get a requirement, and it was about banned books in the public school library system. And Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson was talking about a lot of stuff kids that go through just growing up, but it's also a lot about the politics, a lot about how kids are treated by adults. And this is something that I liked about the Institute, because it did have me ask myself a lot of questions after I read it. And some of the questions that I asked are basically how people treat, my kid when he is, at school or elsewhere. I feel like there are a lot of things that it made me uneasy about a lot of things, about how kids get treated and how they get basically disrespected just because they're small and they are not, of age. And I think we all, growing up, understand that kids, there are some that act 12, there are some that are 12 and act 8, and there are some that are 12 that act 20 years old or older. And I feel like just because a kid challenges you and puts you on the spot, you shouldn't treat them like crap. You should honor that moment because your kid has grown up, And there's a lot of things that happen in this book that art is something that, it strikes emotion in you. And this is one of Stephen King's probably better books, because I feel like it is one of his art pieces, one of his masterpieces, because it does strike a lot of emotions in you, especially if you are raising a kid or you have a kid. You will get upset a little bit. Just the way the adults treat the kids in the book. My two favorite characters aren't actually the main characters. My two favorite characters are actually Avery and Kalisha. They actually aid. They help the two main characters in the book, mainly Luke, but others as well. And so I'm going to have to list those as my two favorite characters for Stephen King as of yet. Even though I like Rose Madder, I really liked Dirty Gertie, and a couple other Stephen King favorites that I like, characters that I like. And this one really kind of hit home for me a little bit, and I really appreciated, the way that it made you like deflate yourself a little and understand what kids go through these days, especially these days, because I feel kids these days, they go through a lot more than, us 80s kids. We had it simple. Go out and play, the end. And yeah, we had some stuff that happened in school, but nothing like these days where they're they have all these elements that haven't been there before in the school system, are something we chose to overlook, and now we're looking at it and we're understanding that kids, every day they go to a war zone, and you're lucky to get them back every day. And that's something I also took away from this book. So those, I don't want to tell you the whole story and give away. I want to give this a review so you yourself read it. But basically the concept of the story is Luke is a very, very, very smart kid, extremely smart. In fact, that in the beginning of the book, he is accepted to, I think he's 12 in the book, if I remember correctly. I probably should have wrote that down. But he's 12, and he got accepted to a college. He was already in a very premier school for kids, and the beginning scene is them pulling Luke into the office and their parents saying, "I don't know what to do with your kids," and the parents are like, "Well, what did he do?" And the principal is, it's not exactly what he did. Well, yes and no, but it's more that we can't offer him no challenges anymore, and a kid that isn't challenged, he's gonna sit there and get bored and rot. And so the beginning scene is actually the principal and Luke trying to get to the parents, to get him into this very prestigious Yale-like school. And so that's something I also like, because sometimes parents don't realize how smart their kids are, and your perspective is different from a child's perspective. Yeah, their minds are not quite there, but that doesn't mean that the wisdom and the intelligence is there. And that's something I liked about that scene, because Luke was really trying to tell him, like, look, you gotta let go of me sometime, and I'd rather you let me go to this place where we can keep in contact, where people are watching me, than me being at home and being miserable and just watching cartoons and let my mind rot. And that's something I really liked about that first scene. So I think I got ahead of myself, or I got lost here, but so this book, there's a lot about this book. It's basically about this kid Luke. He gets kidnapped. He gets taken to this place called the Institute. And in this institute, they're testing him, and he doesn't know why they're testing him. And the other kids are like, they kind of give him the rundown of things, and it's nothing I'm giving away. It's already in the the breakdown of the book on the cover. But they're testing him because for ESP type like things. And this is, at that point I can't tell you anymore, because it's more complex than really me saying it. But I feel so the basic concept of the book, before I start ranting again or getting sidetracked. The basic concept of this book is Luke is a very, very smart kid, extremely smart, and that actually is something, him getting into that Ivy League school is the reason why he himself got kidnapped, because they were going to wait to kidnap him, but because kids with their certain abilities that they're looking for are very rare, they decided to go ahead and kidnap him now instead of later in life, where possibly he would never been kidnapped. And so they are testing him for all these different things, and throughout all these tests and why he's hanging out with the kids in the book, you see how other kids treat him, how he treats other kids. You see his perspective of his peers as a smart kid, and you see his perspective of adults. And throughout the main thing that really made this book is throughout this book, his personality does not stay the same. It actually starts to change. It starts to, I almost feel like, corrode a little bit. So along the way, he starts getting all these thoughts, these corrosive thoughts about adults and about his life and about how he feels about certain situations. And that's what I feel that really makes this book. The saving grace of the book is eventually along the way, he starts to realize, like, hey, maybe people are just assholes and it's not me. And that is another saving grace. That's another gem of the book that I really liked. I don't want to give away all the book, but there is another character in there, Tim. He is an ex-cop. Bad situations happened basically when he was living in Florida, and he's hitchhiking because of, something happened on a flight, and he hitchhiked. He used that money that he got refunded for the flight, and he hitchhiked through, I think it was Georgia or Alabama. I think it was Alabama. He ended up in Alabama, and at that point they cut off, and you go straight to Luke through the whole story until eventually you get back to Tim, I think his name is. And that's another thing I liked about the book and another thing I hated about the book, because Stephen King wrote another book called The Regulators, which is really good. It starts off really good. You start to, get into, you start clinging to this main character basically throughout the whole story, and then suddenly he's gone. And that style, that's kind of what happens here. I'm not saying that the character dies or anything. I'm just saying that at one point they cut him off, and then you go straight to Luke, and you're like, well, what heck happened to Tim? What happened to this ex-cop? Because he just cuts him off. Well, throughout the story, you hear like little snippets of what he's doing while Luke is doing something. And eventually the story gets woven back into where Tim pops into the story, and then Luke and Tim basically do their thing in the book, and that's all I can say. But as far as a review, I'm a bit biased because I am Stephen King. I'm going to put that out there. Yes, it's an amazing book. I liked it. I think it's one of his better books. Absolutely, it's one of his better books. Not better than it. Better than Rose Madder, though, which Rose Madder is my favorite. The real takeaway to this, I think I said it before in my video, that it had me ask questions. So these are some questions that I want you to ask yourself, especially if you're raising a kid like I am, or you have a kid. I want you to ask these questions to yourself, and really be honest with yourself. And that's the takeaway from this book. If you can answer these questions, then you probably like the book. So one of them is, how do you treat kids? Whether it's your kids or someone else's kids, how do you treat them? If someone dropped off a kid at your house to watch, how would you treat them? If they got out of line, how would you treat them? If they're acting in line, how would you treat them? The second question is how do your kids treat adults? Another perspective of this is, how do your kids view adults as well? And how do adults treat your kids when you're not with them? So when you drop them off at school, are they out and about in the real world, on their way home or whatever they're doing, how are they treated? How do you think adults treat your kids? And the other one is, I think I already asked this, but how do your kids feel about how adults treated them? That was like the question I think that I really took away from this book, that I really appreciated Stephen King kind of like bringing that little light to me, because I'm guilty of a lot of stuff, and that just kind of hit home to me, basically. So that's my review of the book. I don't want to make this too long. I have this ability just to rant and go off into places. And so I'm going to end the video here. And I hope to hear the answers to your questions if you're willing to put that out there in the internet space. All right, you guys have a good one until next review.